TPR.
Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the TPR pod. This is another episode in the series, sort of quote unquote, that we're doing this month on the 75th anniversary of Pakistan. We're talking about some of the important issues that I think are important and are not discussed as much in the mainstream news, media, internet cycle. One of those is public transportation. And public transportation is something that over the past year, 2 years in Pakistan has taken on this entirely new lease of life in terms of how much people are talking about it and how important it is considered. This is because our infrastructure is falling apart. Cars are getting insanely expensive. Fuel is getting even more insanely expensive. So we have Gulraiz from Twitter. He's somebody I know off Twitter on the show to talk about it. Gulraiz is somebody who's very, very enthusiastic about public transport. He posts a lot about it. He tweets a lot about it. And we talk about the history of public transport in Pakistan and the recent developments over the past 10 years, with all the BRTs and the multiple cities across Pakistan, the good, the bad, why public transport is so important and so necessary at this point in time, much more so than perhaps any times in the past. It's a very interesting episode talking about something that directly impacts the lives of everybody living, working, moving around in Pakistan. Thank you very much to Gulraiz for coming on the show. Without further ado, let's jump right into pod number 162 with Gulraiz Khan. So yeah, I was saying you've been traveling a lot recently. Is that for...
No, it wasn't a lot. It was just I was in London for holidays.
Acha. Okay. I think you come to London frequently. This is from my just general spying on your Twitter.
No. So it just so happened that this year I've gone twice. Acha. And when I went the first time, it was the first time I'd actually been to London. For some odd reason, I think I just hadn't gone there because I think I was scared the visa process was going to be really, scary. It wasn't, surprisingly. It was actually much easier. London's even immigration was far better than what you face in the US. So
right.
I was just afraid nothing.
US mein to, yeah, they're very they seem upset that you're there.
Yeah.
Aap kyun aaye hain idhar? Acha. And you're from Karachi through and through?
Yeah.
Okay. Where did you go to school? Personal sawal for him.
I went to Lums.
I went to Lums. Okay.
Yeah. And then grad school, I went to US. So besides that, I've been in Karachi throughout. I was at Parsons in New York.
Okay. So you've वो theme एक मुझे बनती नजर आ रही है, like public transport cities, London, New York, Lahore not so much, but चलो.
Actually, Lahore, like we mentioned last time, is the pioneer in Pakistan. हल्का लेते हैं आप Lahore को.
So, being from Karachi, but you spend time in Lums, are you a Karachi person, or are your quote-unquote loyalties split between the cities? I've only lived in Karachi, to be honest. जितना time मैंने पाकिस्तान में गुजारा है. So, I'm curious how you feel.
I enjoy Lahore. I go there often, but I don't think you can shift loyalties just like that. It's not possible.
Where did you go to school in Karachi? Like pehle?
I was at St. Patrick's throughout.
Acha. Okay. All the Saints. ठीक है.
Yeah.
As we've talked, I want you on. Independence Day मुबारक हो. This comes out day after tomorrow. तो वो गुजर चुका होगा. But yeah, I want to do this month. Usually we don't do Pakistan related stuff as much, and like हालात क्या हो रहे हैं. It's more like climate change and एक दो उधर की बातें. But because it's like the 75-year anniversary, मैंने सोचा कि थोड़ा dramatic हो जाते हैं. And I'll get like people like Omer, and you have been requested for a while. Just full disclosure, I don't know. How do you feel about that?
I guess okay. all those tweets amount to something, I guess.
वो people were like, यार bro, ये गुलरेज को लाना बहुत जरूरी है bro, मतलब public transport में घुसा हुआ है, and I'm like, yeah, okay. I don't know if I can, if I know enough to talk to him. But फिर मैंने उस hesitation को छोड़ दिया, मैंने कहा नहीं, मुझे नहीं पता, गुलरेज will tell me. But yeah, so the public transport thing, I think पिछले 1-2 सालों में it's been getting more and more traction in like the public eye, because Pakistan seems to have like this myriad number of issues where it's hard for the masses to concentrate on any one problem. But पिछले 1.5-2 साल में with climate change, but also with like, I think with the rising cost of fuel, people are talking about like public transport way more. Or Karachi mein, generally there's always people talking about infrastructure and the lack thereof of infrastructure. So you have been tweeting about this for a long while. It's pretty much what people would associate with your account. So how do you find yourself so interested in public transport?
So I think वो एक opportune moment इस वक्त आया हुआ है where the fuel prices rose so much that it really hit people in the face अचानक से जब हुआ. लेकिन I think ये moment आना था, अभी नहीं तो 1 साल बाद 2 साल बाद आना था, not because of fuel prices, but because you were hitting the limits of what was physically possible in your cities, right? आप 15 से 20 मिलियन के शहर जो हैं आपके, या लाहौर 15 बिलियन, whatever, they cannot operate on private automobile for every individual. It is just not possible. Humanly, the amount of space a car needs to travel on the road, the amount of space it needs to park, ये अगर आप यूएस में छोटे साइज सिटीज जाएं जैसे क्लीवलैंड ओहायो या डिट्रॉइट और व्हाटएवर, वहां पे you'll see most of downtown is just parking lots. ठीक है, so that a car centric city is a different kind of city जिसमें इतना स्पेस का वेस्ट होता है. वहां पे 8 लेन के हाईवेज हैं, highways in the heart of the city, literally, right? So when you अच्छा, अब पाकिस्तान में obviously that kind of investment is not there in building roads, and thank God it isn't. Like अल्लाह का लाख शुक्र है, हम गरीब थोड़े से हैं कि हमने इस तरह की हरकतें नहीं की हैं, क्योंकि उसके बगैर then you started hitting the limits of what was physically possible. सही है, तो इसलिए अब रात को शाम को 6-5 बजे आपके लेबर फोर्स में अगर कोई 15, 20, 25, 30 लाख लोग हैं, वो सब एक साथ निकलते हैं to go across the city. You find yourself in a logjam, right? Because you're traveling very inefficiently. In New York or London में एक train आती है, a train comes every 3 minutes, sometimes 1.5 minutes, right? And each train can take 600-700 people and whisk them away. And another train comes 3 minutes, whisk them away. That, imagine if all of those are traveling on the road in 600 different vehicles, whether that's a motorbike or a car. It's just not possible, right? So this had to happen. It was a question of when, not if, this would have happened, right? And people who looked at this they've seen this happen in US cities, they've seen this happen in other cities like Jakarta, in Bangkok. हर जगह दुनिया में हमने ये देखा है, right? China is seeing this. I mean, पागल तो नहीं है दुनिया के सारे शहर जो इसमें इन्वेस्ट करते हैं पब्लिक ट्रांसिट. मतलब हम ही कोई बहुत स्मार्ट थे कि हमने नहीं किया और बाकी
स्टार्टिंग पॉइंट तो ये हर कॉन्वर्सेशन में ये है कि हम सबसे स्मार्ट थे. So I think we can't really deviate from that. But where does your what age does Gulraiz get interested in the idea of public transport? Is it your time spent in the US or before? Because you wrote that amazing piece in Dawn for your Karachi journey through the lens of public transport. Where did your own interest start in this?
I think एक बचपन में था, क्योंकि we didn't have a car a lot, right? We got a car much later in life. When we had a consistent car, उससे पहले being able to move around was always a challenge. Whether that was to go see friends, right? And public transport was उस वक्त भी नहीं exist करती थी. So I remember being annoyed by that even when I was in O-levels, A-levels, when I was younger. Like वो सारे those are always there. Then I think I happened to travel. The first time outside of Pakistan was 2007. So Model UN conference. I was at Lums. I went to Istanbul. And when I saw the tram, I was like, "What is this? What is this magic?" And it was at Great Tram. और वो सुल्तानमत में जब जाती है, and I mean, अक्सर जगहों पे तो इतनी जगह नहीं है. वो ट्रैम अगर गुजर रही है तो गाड़ी नहीं गुजर सकती. Like very tiny streets, right? I mean, if they can do it, what's stopping us, right? So I think वो पहला एक aha moment था कि एक second दुनिया में there are better ways to move around, which I've experienced myself. And then I think it became an addiction. And then thankfully, a few years later, Lahore में the पहली BRT opened, and I went to see it.
Right.
And yeah, I've consistently noted, एक दफा जब आप experience कर लेते हैं, उसके बाद there's no turning back for anyone. And ये Twitter पे भी आप लोगों को देखेंगे, कोई कहेगा यार मैं पहली दफा green line, what is this magic? You know, या जो use कर लेते हैं, it's that you're converted.
Yeah, Karachi, they've been those historically. I didn't spend time in Karachi much in the 90s, but 2000 से 2010 में था, and you know वो जो चमकदार हमारी buses हुआ करती थी, they were all about and people would use them. But आहिस्ता आहिस्ता वो भी like I think they were all एक तो at some level private. फिर उनके अपने पट्टे भी थे. With regards to quote unquote transport mafia जिसको कहते थे, but पता नहीं वो था या नहीं. And then they also vanished. So that I also found to be like a weird thing कि हाँ चलो public transport है, it's not great, गायब हो गया. and people did use it. But I think I really agree with your idea कि it's hard to appreciate something. Like the other idea would be it's hard to appreciate the value of something until you see it. Like you can't imagine कि public transport का क्या फायदा है. But then अच्छा so
और ये नहीं कि sorry just to add this, ये नहीं कि आप एक दफा देखेंगे तो you're gonna get converted.
Sure.
देखो, the public transport is not a one-off experience. It's not a roller coaster. ठीक है. It in fact बहुत से मुल्कों में जहाँ exist करती हैं वहाँ इस पे debates भी होती हैं कि यार इतनी congestion buses की वजह से हो गई है and so on. So ये मसला ये नहीं कि बना देंगे तो हल हो जाएगा. I was at this museum, transport museum, और वहाँ पे once they built out these 8 lines in London in the early 20th century, people didn't switch. Right. They had to spend years and years of convincing people to switch to it. Yeah. So that is also, I just want to warn, ये नहीं कि कल बन जाएगी और सब बोलेंगे you know ये क्या हुआ, हमने तो नहीं
जब पहली दफा कोई चीज बनती है तो you know you're trying to attract customers जो generations से who have been living without it.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you know why Pakistan, we'll give this Karachi limited because I suppose that's where I'm familiar with. But America में there was this big idea that public transport की growth was restricted, especially you know big rail, high-speed rail between the cities, because of a push by the automaker lobbies who wanted the focus to stay on big highways, big streets, ताकि ज़्यादा गाड़ियाँ बिकें. America's obviously a powerhouse manufacturer, तो उनकी lobby शॉबीज़ का चक्कर था, सब कुछ था. The 8-lane highways वगैरह, वो highways की lanes बढ़ती जाती हैं. There's like studies that suggest that you know the more lanes you make, you're just making more room for more traffic rather than you know because gaadiyan to badhti rahengi. Do we know why there has not been much focus in Karachi on public transport ki importance, especially when we had the KCR at one point?
So I think there's one policy like this is not made at the city level, it's a national policy. Okay. So I don't think it's Karachi centric, it's countrywide.
Sure.
Dusra, I think it traces not to opposition to public transport, it comes from us borrowing the American model of growth in terms of suburbia. So speculative land spreading out and stuff. When you necessarily build that, you can't do public transport. You can't do public transport in DHA. वो possible नहीं है क्योंकि आप हर घर के सामने से नहीं लाइन गुजार सकते हैं, right? So and they don't need it, right? So when your key decision makers' focus is to build spread out suburban housing where public transport doesn't feature, then they're not interested in public transport. And that's it. It's lack of interest that comes from how we imagine our society is going to grow. Right. How do we imagine our cities are going to grow?
Right.
Okay. So which is why over the last, I've only looked at the last 20-25 years because I've lived through that. The focus has been on road building, highway building, right? On building expressways and signal-free corridors because आपने फैसला कर लिया कि growth means गाड़ी, घर, अपनी ज़मीन.
Yeah.
And when that is the model of growing, then उसमें public transport कहाँ feature करेगी?
Sure. But then that also seems to be very perspective-wise. It feels limited towards what in Pakistan would be the extreme upper financial class of society, which is a
I
very
not
small number of
necessarily.
people.
नो नॉट नेसेसरली आपकी मिडिल क्लास का भी यही ग्रोथ ड्रीम है और क्या है अब लाहौर में मुझे बताएं इफ यू गो अलोंग द कनाल यू नो टुवर्ड्स साउथ वेस्ट क्या हाउसिंग सोसाइटी आफ्टर हाउसिंग सोसाइटी वो अपर क्लास तो नहीं है
I mean, by upper class, I mean, Pakistan, I don't think the majority of people can buy a house, right?
नहीं देखो आप एस्पिरेशन तो ये है ना हाँ दे कांट
हाँ
बट एस्पिरेशन तो यही हमने बिल्ड की है ना अब अगर आप महमूदाबाद में भी चले जाएं तो वहां भी जमीन के घर है लोगों के ज्यादातर राइट अब डेंसिफिकेशन होना शुरू हुई है क्योंकि दे कांट अफोर्ड मोर तो उसी पे बनाते जाते हैं बट फॉर अ लॉन्ग टाइम एस्पिरेशन तो यही थी कि मेरी अब चाहे वो कराची में आप पूरा आपका स्कीम 33 गुलशन में मार व्हाट इज इट इफ नॉट सबर्बन हाउसिंग राइट आई मीन देयर पॉकेट्स ऑफ डेंसिटी लेकिन जब एस्पिरेशन ये है वो तो एंड व्हिच इज व्हाई आर majority of middle income people enamored by Behriya town.
because अपना घर
dream
yes
खुला road ज़मीन बाहर लगता है and then we've got visuals of cities like Dubai which is also villas I mean there are clusters of tall buildings but actually beyond Sheikh Zayed it's all villas so that's really the aspiration it's a model that we've borrowed from the United States primarily and a lot of countries borrowed that from United States
sure
and I think which is why वो decision makers के भी जहन में वही है वो general public के जहन में भी वही है and so there is एक तो वो डिमांड भी नहीं थी पब्लिक ट्रांसपोर्ट की इतनी ज्यादा क्योंकि हर कोई सोचता है कि हम गाड़ी खरीद लेंगे और कुछ ने खरीद ली सब नहीं खरीद सके जो नहीं खरीदे वो बेचारे बाइक पे आ गए और अब जो है वो जब आप रोज पेट्रोल भरवाने जाते हैं और आपके मुंह पे चमाट लगता है 250 रुपए का तो फिर आपको ख्याल आता है कि देयर इज अ बेटर वे टू डू दिस एंड आई थिंक it's again it's not their fault this dream is sold to people of course
जब तक आप उनको एक आइडिया दिखाएंगे नहीं तो it's hard for people to just imagine this but then if you go a bit further back as I'm sure your parents will have mentioned and my parents have also mentioned कि कराची में तो एक ज़माने में circular railway होता था बहुत आसान था यहाँ से चढ़ जाओ वहाँ से उतर जाओ there was like a solution to this, which I think in your write-up you mentioned it wasn't meant to be a public transport revolution, but it became one because people just found it so easy. Why did that just die out? Was it this changing interest thing?
I'll be very honest. This circular railway, actually, I don't understand what happened.
Right.
I actually really don't understand what happened. वो बनना शुरू आई थिंक उन्होंने लूप बनाया था फॉर इंटरनल रेलवे के लिए बट आई थिंक इट देन दे ओपन इट टू द पब्लिक इनिशियल प्लान्स में था सो 1952 का जो एमआरबी प्लान था उसमें दे मेंशन कि आप जो सैटेलाइट्स बनाएंगे एंड देन हैव अ रेलवे दैट कनेक्ट्स इट सो इट्स नॉट दैट इट वाज नॉट इमेजिन्ड एज अ पब्लिक ट्रांसपोर्ट ऑप्शन आई थिंक eventually they landed on it 1969 में it was up and running when I asked my parents they have no memory of it even though wo 99 tak tha they never used it so it just seems that one it was too late and two it wasn't serving everyone's needs so it was serving a lot of people's needs there were millions of commuters using it what I don't truly understand is how were people so okay with it withering away and I guess you need to go to archives you need to speak to people who actively used it Because how could you use it and then be okay with not using it one day and then never talk about it and it is wiped out from people's memories? I just don't get it. I don't have the answer to that. I think it's something I'll need to figure out.
From what you've said, it seems to be like a conflict of Karachi किस direction में बन रहा था लोग कहाँ थे and उसकी links क्या थी and also the aspirational model where perhaps people just started to feel like ये तो this is like a shit way to travel and we should have cars and more independence and stuff. अच्छा public transport now these lines the green orange yellow multiple colors of the spectrum उनकी lines जो हैं they are popping up across Pakistani cities. There's I think Lahore was one of the pioneers in this. There's one in Peshawar. Is there one in Islamabad/Pindi? There is. And Karachi mein there has been one zamane se under construction. Is it done?
Yes, the green line is up and running.
Acha. So have you seen all of them?
So I've seen all of them except the Multan one. There's one in Multan as well.
One in Multan also.
Yes, Multan also has one. That's the only one I haven't used. And now Islamabad has like 3 or 4 new ones. There's one that goes all the way to the airport. So I'll
Oh,
be going
wow.
hopefully next week. I can't wait to
Right.
try that.
Right.
Uh,
Are they all, so
uh,
then they all function the same way, where there's a segregated line और उसके अंदर बसें चलती हैं?
so almost all of them, not 100% all of them. The Islamabad one में जो 2 additions हुए हैं, those are not on segregated lanes.
अच्छा.
That's in normal traffic. The ones in Karachi, so Karachi में the green line is segregated, the bus rapid transit, but this new people's bus service is not segregated. It's on normal roadway. Peshawar में भी there is a core trunk line, but उसकी जो feeder buses हैं, they sort of come and merge in it and so on. So they've got a, what you call third generation BRT, which is flexible. So not all of them are segregated busways.
Right. So these cities are also all very different in terms of like, their histories, construction, layout, the sort of people that live there. How has your experience been in the ones that you've used? Do they all seem to be working? Is there all seem to be like a good takeoff from the population for the concept as it stands? Yeah, there's things that seem to be just implemented. Because Pakistan, I see there's also like a history of Project Bana Diya, right? And there wasn't like an active study of kaise karna chahiye tha, zarurat kya thi. There was like a, there's been a lot of political influence in this discussion कि Muslim League ने बना दिया, वो तो बहुत महंगा था. People's Party PTI ने बना दिया. Some now they're saying वो गलत था, whatever. How has your experience been on these lines and in the cities that they are made in?
Yeah, the cities might be very different, but उन सब में the need for mobility is constant. These are large cities. छोटा कोई भी शहर नहीं है इसमें, ठीक है? I mean, you're spread out over a large area, people will need to move from one place to the other.
Yeah.
Invariably, her cities may business and opportunity work is concentrated in certain areas, and people live in other areas, and poor people live further away from the city. They're pushed out on the edges. In a lot of cases, obviously exceptions हैं हर जगह पे, ठीक है? So the need for mobility is constant. ठीक है? Now, none of these lines came out of the blue. Almost all of them have had years of study and research behind it by mostly donor agencies, international agencies, and so on. Karachi case mein, you've had studies dating all the way to 1952, and then revised in the 70s, and then again we did a whole set of studies in the 90s. Then JICA ne aake 2012 mein dobara, from 10 to 12 or whatever, they did a whole set of studies. Or if I've only looked at the Karachi ones, they all build on each other. So hamesha jab karte hain, they look at the previous ones, which is why some of the contours of these proposals are consistent across decades. Okay? So I don't know so much about Lahore. I know that Lahore mein jab inhone ki thi, they also built on previous studies and so on. So ये जो 4 लाइनें हैं, it's not new, right? और अभी LDA आगे भी बनाएगा, 2 लाइनें भी नहीं बनी हैं, 2 बन गई हैं, 2 नहीं बनी हैं. So ये नीड, अच्छा, अब क्या नीड कांस्टेंट और नीड की जो फॉर्म है, क्या वो ये लाइन अगर आज गुरु मंदिर से जा रही है तो कल क्या वहां जरूरत नहीं होगी? आई डोंट थिंक इतना हार्ड एंड फास्ट है. श्योर यू शुड अपडेट योर स्टडीज. अगर वो 20 साल पुरानी हो गई है, आप नंबर्स अपने दोबारा देख सकते हैं एंड सो ऑन, ठीक है? कि वहां पे एग्जैक्ट नीड क्या है एंड सो ऑन. कंजेशन शिफ्ट हुई है तो इतना हमारी अप टू डेट चीजें नहीं होती, बट आई थिंक ऑल ऑफ दिस इज वेल प्लान्ड. यू कुड आर्ग्यू के बस क्यों बनाई, ट्रेन क्यों नहीं बनाई, इस तरह की चीजें आप बिल्कुल आर्ग्यू कर सकते हैं. या बस महंगी बनाई, ये सस्ती बन सकती थी, ये बिल्कुल पॉलिटिकल कॉन्वर्सेशंस है, एंड आई थिंक वी शुड हैव दोस कॉन्वर्सेशंस. Definitive आंसर नहीं आएगा आपके पास. There's always trade-offs and you make choices depending on what's available, donor कितने पैसे दे रहा है, किस चीज के दे रहा है, and so on, ठीक है? और पॉलिटिकल एक्सपीरियंस ही क्या है, देखिए, बनाना पॉलिटिकल लीडरशिप का ही काम है, ठीक है? वही उसके लिए पैसे देगी. अब वो जिस तरह से फ्रेमवर्क में देखती है कि भाई मुझे ये 2 साल में कंप्लीट करनी है वर्सेस मेरे पास 8 साल हैं, those are all political questions, and I think you could argue endlessly on that. And so in my experience, it is not surprising that wherever they've been built, there has been significant uptake. Now, someone can come and say that 1.5 lakh people is not enough. इस पे तो 6 लाख होने चाहिए. And in other city they could be like, नहीं, तो देखिए 2 लाख तो बहुत अच्छी population है जो use कर रही है. This is all meaningless. अगर आपके 1.5 लाख लोग एक सिस्टम पे यूज कर रहे हैं रोजाना, every day, that's 1.5 लाख private automobiles off those roads. ठीक है? That's less pollution, that's less congestion, that's less individual money spent on fuel. सबसे बड़ा तो ये ना कि हम सारे जो है वो अपने प्राइवेट उसके लिए फ्यूल खरीदते हैं जो कि हम इंपोर्ट करते हैं.
Yeah.
So, and that's a big problem right now. So, except Multan, where I haven't seen it, I don't know how it is being used and stuff. Lahore में it's heavily used, the BRT line, Orange line, obviously वो launch हुई थी COVID में, उसका uptake was slow. There was a lot of criticism received for that, but I don't know I think the problem is none of these agencies, because they're all sort of politically, driven. Because, पीछे political ideology थी. They are not transparent about their usage numbers. They're not transparent about their budgets and all of that stuff. These should be public agencies who should release their budgets, and so we can have honest conversations. ठीक है? बंद नहीं करना किसी को. I don't think none of these should be shut down. Sure. We spend far more money on subsidizing steel mills, PIA, other state-owned agencies that benefit even fewer people. So, I don't think इतना डर खौफ होना चाहिए कि अगर 2 billion rupees का सब्सिडी दे दी एक बस लाइन को तो वो बंद हो जाएगी. Like, calm down. There are people who are going to use it.
No, but this brings us to a good conversation that was being had on Twitter, again, because everything in Pakistan gets politicized immediately. ये सब्सिडी के ऊपर बहुत बहस हो रही थी कि ये हम क्यों कर रहे हैं, and there was people who were looking at it. I suppose again there was a lack of understanding of how this works, but they were looking at it from a profitability angle. Okay, this is losing money, and the idea like these aren't supposed to be for profit, right? So talk a little bit about why that is a problem, and that mentality is incorrect.
Yeah, ये सिर्फ पाकिस्तान में नहीं है, ये globally है. ये conversation न्यूयॉर्क में भी होती है कि MTA, why does MTA cost so much? Because वहाँ पे भी जो the MTA which runs the New York City subway is actually driven from the province उनका, the New York state, right? तो state के जो बाकी छोटे शहर हैं, or Albany or whatever, they say like, why are we funding all of this for one city? ठीक है? So I think ये global मसला है कि आपका depending on control किसके पास है, they will argue. So London में वो सदीक खान जो उनका मेयर है, वो बेचारा रोता पड़ रहा है हर वक्त कि भाई फंडिंग TFL को फंड करो, TFL को फंड करो. This is good for the city, this is good for the country, but the government जो है, central government, वो नहीं करती release funds या वो long term funding नहीं दे रही. ठीक है? So it's fine. It's okay. This conversation happens all over. I think ये political conversation ये होनी चाहिए. Having said that, yes, Pakistan में ये नया था, so people didn't know how to approach this. और एक political party ने narrative build किया, क्योंकि उन्होंने नहीं बनाई थी तो उन्होंने narrative build किया कि ये बड़ा खर्चा है और ये इसकी जगह अस्पताल और स्कूल होने चाहिए. आप अस्पताल और स्कूल में भी लोगों को जाना होता है. So how will they get there? Right? So mobility, I think, is as primary a need for a city as health, education. If you can't move around, you can't go to work. Then you can't basically earn an income for yourself. And that is what it comes down to, right? But putting that conversation aside, उन्होंने उसको politicize किया or whatever. The second thing is transparency नहीं है, right? तो जब उन्होंने अपनी जब line बना दी, तो उन्होंने झूठ बोला कि ये तो बड़ी sustainable है ये वो, हालांकि उसकी पूरी funding the provincial government was doing. So there has been obfuscation, lack of transparency, बकवास करना ट्विटर पे, ट्रोल आर्मी को जो है अपने टॉकिंग पॉइंट्स दे देना. So all of that happened, and that's whatever. It's history. I think it's fine.
Par for the course.
What is, and it's public arena. These things will happen. वो उसको avoid नहीं कर सकते. Having said that, I think the good thing is that in competition with each other, now they've all built something in each of their provincial capitals. And to me, that makes me happy. कि ठीक है आप यार compete करके ट्विटर पे लोग गंदा करके, if at the end of the day, there are hundreds of thousands of people across the country who are breathing free and like sukoon mein air conditioned bus mein, they're going to work. I think that's fine. It's
like this. I had this like pseudo joke, but which is actually kind of a sad thing to say. I was like, "Yaar, दिखावे के लिए कर लो." I mean, you don't believe in it, right? Just pretend you care and do something. Okay.
उसमें एक conversation देखो, yes, I think a fair point in all of this is this should be sustainable. अगर बहुत high subsidy होगा, you can create wasteful systems, ठीक है, जो कि wasteful हैं. we shouldn't. We're smarter, we should be smarter about this. How to make them sustainable is कि उनके one fair evasion ना हो, so fair collection needs to be robust.
Right.
Subsidize करें vulnerable groups को, whether that's school children, as in those who should be subsidized, the poor, you can give them direct subsidy on their cards, travel cards and stuff. वो सब करें आप. But जो the rest of the population that is now जो एक रिक्शा लेके 250 रुपए खर्च करती है वो 50 रुपए में happily they will shift to this. ठीक है, if it serves them. So fair control. Dusra, there's a lot of land, right? So utilize that, whether that's advertising, renting out for things, for film shootings or whatever. Other agencies in the world use to raise revenue. So you raise revenue that offsets some of your costs. The third is, especially for train transit systems, they use land for commercial ventures. So अगर मेरा train station है Liverpool Street पे, तो उसके ऊपर 50 मंजिला बिल्डिंग मैंने खड़ी की, उसका revenue subsidizes this, right? So you could do all of these things. I'll be sure buses can't do that. Bus stop के ऊपर बिल्डिंग नहीं खड़ी कर सकते आप, but there are other ways of raising revenue. So you should think about sustainability, because obviously you will be the system will be sustainable, and two, the fair cost might come down for people, which means more people will get to use it, and it's not a burden on taxpayer. देखो जब भी taxpayer किसी भी चीज को fund करेगा, उसका हक बनता है पूछना, कि क्यों इस पे कर रहा हूँ, and आप उससे हक नहीं छीन सकते.
Yeah. So then, you recently, I think, also wrote an article about the recent bus service in Karachi, and the fare wali baat reminded me of this, of where Karachi mein there have been on and off multiple bus services, but लोगों के दिमाग में there are some concepts that have been ingrained with regards to fare कितना होना चाहिए, बस के operations किस तरीके से होने चाहिए. There's a conductor, you're stopping at every 10 meters, bus stops का चक्कर वगैरह वगैरह. Do you think this is all just like teething pains sort of concept? It's like a change that people just need to get used to, or do you think this is like something that immediately needs addressing, वरना ये भी सब खराब हो जाएगा?
I don't think ये लोगों का मसला है. I think operator का issue था और है, whatever. And हम काफी अरसे से जो बस जिस तरह से बसेस चल रही थी कि you need a conductor and a driver, because आपका बस stop नहीं था, and you didn't have off-board fare collection या on-board automatic fare collection, कि आपने बस में घुसे, आपने कोई card tap किया या whatever. So, which is why you need a conductor. Otherwise, you don't need it. What do you need a conductor for, right? In other cities, because ज़्यादातर transit agencies की जो सबसे बड़ी cost होती है वो people cost होती है, because each bus needs 1 to 2 people, and then आपको अगर 24 घंटे सर्विस या 16 घंटे सर्विस चलानी है, there's 2 shift and so on, right? So they try to optimize for that people cost, and so fare collection को उन्होंने off board कर देते हैं या automatic करते हैं, या ड्राइवर के सामने से गुजरते हुए हर कोई अपना कार्ड टैप करता है, and so on, right? So there are ways to do this. I think इस वक्त हमारे यहाँ, क्योंकि these things are so new, they haven't they're like कुछ भी करके just run it. And I understand this is what we call it, in the work that I do, it's called an MVP approach, the minimum viable product. Right. You release a product that is viable, at the bare minimum.
Yeah.
And that's fine. Okay. I think बहुत जरूरी थी इस वक्त, क्योंकि वो fuel prices बहुत अचानक से, 150 से कोई 250 पे चली गई है, and so on. But this is not sustainable today, right? And I think we need to very quickly build out a transit collection system which is efficient. आपको अपनी cost optimize करनी पड़ेगी. You don't need conductors to run these buses, especially अगर आपने अच्छे bus stops वगैरह बनाए हुए, and so on. And then you need to, देखिए, I'm not a transit planner. There are people who are who study this and who practice this, and they're certified to do this. They will tell you how to do routing, कितना headway होना चाहिए, all of that stuff. So यार आप करें hire किसी को consultant, वो आपको बता देगा what's the best way to go about it.
This is not a unique problem that has been thought of the first time in the world, right?
Yeah, exactly.
How do you were talking about your fare collection systems. ये BRTs जो हैं, I've never traveled on any one of those. How do they work? There's like a gate.
Off-board, yeah. So it's off-board. Stations already have before you enter the station, you tap your card.
Right.
There are booths where you get cards and you can get single ride tokens or a card which you can top up.
Okay.
Yeah. So as you enter the station, you already tap your card at the turnstile. So when the bus comes, you're all fare paid passengers, which is why you quickly on board. So all gates open simultaneously. Everyone gets on. No one's checking for fare. The gates close. You move on.
Right.
This is the advantage of off-board fare collection. कि आपकी boarding time बहुत reduce हो जाता है, which means the travel time of the bus is significantly reduced.
Right.
अगर आप लंदन की बस में अगर आप स्टेशन स्टॉप पे खड़े हुए हैं और कोई 20 लोग खड़े होंगे तो वो एक एक करके 20 लोग अपना कार्ड टैप करते हैं. That slows the bus down. Right. So when you have non-dedicated stops या off-board नहीं होता, so time then becomes a cost.
Yeah, here in Dublin it's even more ridiculous. जहाँ बस रुकती है तो you have to tell the driver कि आपको किधर जाना है. He punches up a specific fare. फिर you tap that, and then the next person does the same thing.
You're kidding me.
Yeah, it's very inefficient. Like
that's sad.
Yeah,
that's really sad. I would expect better from Dublin.
People do. But होता कुछ नहीं है. Yeah, अच्छा. So then and the other bus service in Karachi, that's the regular conductor method.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Is it a variable fare? Yeah, is that like a flat fare?
Yeah, it was supposed to be flat fare. No, it was supposed to be variable fare, but शुरू में जब launch किया तो उन्हें flat fare रखा था 50. I think it should be flat fare. I don't think it should be variable fare, and I think that's because mostly the low-income folks travel longer distances, and the higher-income folks travel shorter distances because they're closer to the center.
Right.
So they subsidize those who are further off.
Sahi.
You shouldn't penalize people who live further.
Yeah. The average works out then. There was also this article that Mahim wrote some years ago, illustrating वो जो पुराने ज़माने की जो bus service थी, not really that पुराना ज़माना, but उसके जो dynamics थे, and there were these sort of addas on both ends. The routes were, if I remember correctly, they were private. Like someone had bought the rights to a route. I didn't think that was a concept. And उसमें competition था, token था, one person, all of that. How is this new bus service working? I'm assuming this is a government initiative, and not like private citizens controlling routes. How does this function?
So the way it used to function throughout the 90s and early this century, the government defined routes. They gave you route permits. So you bought route permits and you ran your buses privately on this. Now you could be someone who has 100 buses, but mostly it was people who had 2, 3, 5 buses or whatever. So it was a very sort of dispersed market. ठीक है. Obviously इसमें competition था, ठीक है. अब जैसे मरवत की अगर line है, I don't know how many owners there are, और वो मिलके they're running it on the Marwat line. So that is defined as the Marwat coach. It could be that one person owns all of them. I don't know the ownership patterns, ठीक है. But just an aside, that article from Mahim is one of my favorite pieces. I think it is it's so beautifully written, and it simplifies something so complex in such a fantastic way. This new lines. So the company that is formed is a private operator, but the government has selected that operator. And now I think what they will do differently is they will issue operational guidelines that you have to meet certain guidelines to be able to do it.
Right.
Jo Green Line wali company hai, the one that runs it operationally I still think that's a state company. Like it's not a private organization, right? उस तरह से I think the way forward, so in other cities there are different kinds of models. In some cities the city owns it entirely. In others, so in New York everything is owned by the NYCTA, the New York City Transport Authority. They own the bus system. In London there are private companies so the government issues guidelines that the bus has to be this. This is how you will operate. This is we'll track everything. There's good sort of oversight of the system. That I think might be a more sustainable model. But again, I'm not a public policy expert, so I think people can review these. Jo Punjab mein jo Lahore Metro bus chalaati hai, that is provincially run entirely. There's no private operator in that. We'll have to figure this out. Abhi nahi shayad humne figure out kiya hai ki what is the best way to go forward. I think each of these provincial departments, transport departments, will have to figure out what works best for their cities.
Yeah, I keep thinking about this from a Karachi perspective because ek to chalo meri familiarity zyada hai, but there has always, like jitni bhi meri zindagi hai, there's always been a conversation about Karachi ka infrastructure and how it is failing to keep up with the city's like population and demands. And abhi pichle dinon mein, I didn't ask you, I hope you survived the rain fine, you and your family and everybody. But it's been insane, and there seems to be, like, do you feel hopeful about this? I guess is the very subjective question that I'm asking. Ye developments ho rahi hain, and there's like chalo theek hai, there's like some political checkers being played in the background, but kuch ho raha hai. The direction we're taking, especially considering abhi humne climate change ke bare mein to baat ki hi nahi na humne, because I don't think that's in the public sphere of conversation in any huge way. There's some people yelling about it on Twitter, and kabhi kabar news pe aaya tha कि forest fires ho gayi hain, but nobody's really addressing कि Lahore में smog इतनी क्यों हो रही है, and do cars play into this? It's just like India से हमने वो कर लिया, किसानों ने वो जला दिए. It seems to me from an outsider's view to be very all over the place. But do you feel in terms of public transport, people are taking the right steps, at least, or are there any glaring omissions that seem to stand out in your eyes? I know you're not an expert. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but filhal, you're all we have on on this podcast right now. So yeah, just what's your opinion on this as an enthusiast?
So one, I think the conversations even on environment are more rooted now. Even just on social media, I think people are very aware that it is environmental degradation and damage. This is affecting things like smog in Lahore, flooding or flood. So the recent flooding, for instance, had made a lot of people question cities' infrastructure. They barish zyada hui hai, and sure, but the kind of damage that happened and the kind of water that is left behind, and so the people are wondering, where is the drainage system? Is there a drainage system? And there are parts of the city where there is no drainage system, right? We just paved reclaimed land and built houses on top of it. So I think that conversation is maturing even on that front. And that conversation is, of course, very intimately linked to how we've built our cities. Right? And I think generally now people are questioning, wait, is this the best way to live in our cities? Because yaar, aapki day-to-day quality of life is affect hoti hai in cheezon se, right? Where do you go have fun? Like, where are people going to have fun? And I think एक maturity conversation में है, एक ज़माना था where we're like so happy, trigger happy with, malls खुल रहे हैं, ये हो रहा है, all of that stuff. Now they're like, wait, where are the parks? Where can I go have, fun in the cities? Why is it so hard to go to the beach? Why is the beach so polluted? And so on. So I think generally over time, people are becoming more conscious and aware of their built environment and are asking these questions, which I think is fantastic. और ये किसी भी civic society की consciousness में ये इस तरह के moments आते हैं जो pivotal होते हैं. For decades and decades, New York used to dump its garbage in the East River. Right. They just dumped it there. And that went on as late as I think 1940s, if not 1960s. And the US Supreme Court had to step in to stop them from doing that.
Well, East River तो ऐसा मजाक था ना कि if you go swim in it, you'll die. Because there was so much pollution.
It's filthy. And जितनी भी उसका जो Manhattan की जो edge है, वो उन्होंने यही कचरे से pack करके reclaim की थी. A lot of it, right? So, unique इसमें भी नहीं है. हम दुनिया में बहुत शहरों में इस तरह के मसले हो चुके हैं. और London literally Thames is a nala. There's literally no waterfront to speak of. You can barely access it. The water is murky.
Brown.
Sure, it doesn't smell. Brown. Silk की वजह से brown है, whatever. But it's you can't swim in it, right? No, you can't. It's not like beautiful waterfront. So I think again, not unique in this. Conversations are happening. Am I hopeful about? Are we heading politically? I don't think high politics जो है is aware of this. वो अपनी कुछ beat पे चल रही है of like who gets to be in power. तो उसमें एक आध दफा कोई I think अब जैसे ये कराची में local elections होने या किसी seat के लिए होता है तो उसमें local politics would feature once in a while. But I don't think the high politics or the national politicians are sensitive to these conversations right now. वो अलग ही अपने दुनिया में रह रहे हैं.
Which is, and that's sort of what, was sort of the impetus for me to start doing these sort of episodes. Like I did an episode with Omer, थोड़े अर्से पहले के, Pakistan में evidence हालात ख़राब हैं, ये मसला है, वो मसला है, but like what are the masle that we're revealing through like developmental research in terms of like लोगों की नौकरियां लग रही हैं over the years, what's the industry looking like before and versus today, because I feel all of this is absent from like the mainstream न्यूज़ चैनल पॉलिटिकल कॉन्वर्सेशन. वो आता रहेगा कि हाँ जी कराची में बारिश हो गई और लोग डूब गए और
there's no serious engagement.
Yeah,
there's no actual serious engagement with why did this happen, who, all of that stuff. Yeah,
and people like Mahim, I think 1-2 साल पहले she did like she loves maps. तो उन्होंने we had an episode with her and Rafe and Davar, and they're like, I mean, if you want to know why, तो ये नाला था, इसके ऊपर आपने हाउसिंग सोसाइटी बना दी, नाला खत्म हो गया. That's it. So like, but you will never hear this in any sort of mainstream conversation, which makes
I think
me
the thing is below them.
I
think the thing is below them to talk about municipal issues,
or they don't like care. Which is my cynical thing. It's not going to affect them. Islamabad में मसले नहीं होते.
Well, actually, Islamabad में भी मसले होना शुरू हो गए. I don't know if you saw E11 की flooding. E11 was because वो यही किया उन्होंने, वहाँ पे नाले जो है बिल्कुल वो पतले कर दिए, कचरा से भर दिया. There's no municipal like trash picking or whatever proper in E11. I mean, यार वही ना, ये कोई जन्नत नहीं थी Islamabad. It had to happen. It was only a question of you had to hit that scale for these problems to prop up. There are parts of Islamabad that looks as dense as Gulistan-e-Johar, right? So if you go to a D12, D13 में उतने ही बड़े apartment blocks हैं, उतनी ही बुरी तरह से planning हुई हुई है उसकी, and it was going to happen at some point. So I think it's happening. Of course, it doesn't affect F10 and like whatever F7, F6 where they live, but आप बच के नहीं रह सकेंगे. Eventually, it will come home to hit you.
Yeah, that's where the concern is, right? When is that point, and how will we be in many aspects beyond the point of return? वो football type situation हो जाएगी when that realization hits those who need to make the decisions. So I wonder, like, if awareness is helping in any way, which is part of why you need to be on the show. Because you're gonna fix this for Pakistan.
No. I have no savior complex. I'm not fixing for anyone. I'm only letting out my personal frustrations because I think this is important. Anyway, I did think advocacy, like talking about it or raising awareness, is important. I agree. लेकिन ये स्ट्रक्चरल इश्यूज हैं, ये इंडिविजुअल एक्शन से नहीं रिजॉल्व होंगे. ठीक है, मैं कुछ भी कर लूं, दुनिया में जाऊं, मैं बस लाइन नहीं चला सकता. Like I don't have that kind of money to run. I would love to own a private network of trams in the city, like American railroad barons. But वो दुनिया खत्म हो गई. You can't do that. So, structural issues cannot be resolved by private action. So I genuinely feel that the only party that can actually address this is the government. ठीक है, उसी के पास रिसोर्सेज होते हैं.
I thought you were going to mention political. No. I was like, oh no. अच्छा.
The only player who can address this is government, because उसके पास होते हैं billions of. वो एक foreign loan ले सकती है, वो bond raise कर सकती है market में. You can, they have the tools to do it. आप ये नहीं individual action से कर सकते हैं. तो मैं, I think I've reached the end of the line of my patience on कि सिर्फ कॉन्वर्जेशन से ये मसला हल होगा, और मोस्ट ऑफ ऑल ट्विटर पे कॉन्वर्जेशन से ये मसला नहीं हल होगा. राइट, ट्विटर पे बहुत ही हमारी एक लिमिटेड दुनिया है जिसमें हमें लगता है कि ये इश्यूज बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट हैं, जबकि होंगे वो इंपॉर्टेंट वो इश्यूज, बट दिस इज नॉट हाउ पीपल टॉक अबाउट इट एंड सो ऑन आउटसाइड ऑफ ट्विटर. एनीवे, यू सी दैट एट एवरी इलेक्शन. आप समझते हैं कि भाई ये जीत जाएगा इलेक्शन में, और कोई और जीत के नीचे आ जाता है. सो I think that correction happens often enough, but we still think it. Anyway, I think we need to push this in public policy. So I really respect people who do that serious work of engaging with the government through think tanks or whatever and so on, right? There are a lot of, now I think the one good thing is a lot of public servants, so civil servants are on Twitter, so they're being exposed to these conversations. पहले वो नहीं होते थे exposed in conversation. So I know a lot of them just like post like, oh, I visited this market, I visited that market, there's a whole war. But I'm hoping some of them over time absorb some of these conversations, because, they have some leeway to play. हर जगह नहीं होता उनका, कुछ वो करते हैं. Will some of these conversations trickle up? I don't know. But it's better than not talking about it, right?
This is for several, I think for a couple of years, जब से हमारे politicians have become very Twitter happy, I have wondered कि who are they tweeting for? ठीक है, and because अब आवाम तो है ही नहीं इतनी पाकिस्तान की कि आप अपने ये point scoring कर रहे हैं, but this is like
I think chattering class. It's the chattering. We're the chattering class.
Yeah.
ठीक है, और वो हम करते बातें, और I think वो भी they enjoy the attention they get. उनको भी थोड़ी celebrity feels आती है. So I guess.
But this is perhaps a very slim but still existing ray of hope कि शायद if enough people yell at them on Twitter कि bro bus का scene good कर लो, not perhaps in those words, but in better composed sentences, they might see that there is potential for political gain. Because again, cynicism के through ही देखते हैं हम सिर्फ दुनिया को, and that might, this is how you end up with troll farms. This train of thought is going to turn me into a supervillain.
Troll farm, yeah.
But yeah, that's a cool idea. We didn't get time to talk about your own design plans for potential Karachi routes that you've worked on as an exercise. But do you expect, are there any upcoming initiatives or projects in the public transport sphere in Pakistan, apart from the Multan setup, that you are aware of, looking forward to, concerned about?
Yeah, so there's a lot, on the plate. In Karachi itself, so work has started on definitely the red line. So this is different from the People's Bus. That's funded mostly by ADB, and then there's a couple of other partners that'll go from behind airport, Mausamiyat se University Road all the way to Dubai.
Achha.
So that's a whole new corridor. That's the work has started on that. There is the yellow line in Karachi, which will go from, again, Numaish through Kalapul, Korangi Road, all the way to Korangi.
These are
and
all
then
BRTs?
To Lande. These are all BRTs. These are BRT lines. But ye banne mein minimum 3, but I think like 5 years, realistically speaking. Jo yellow line hai, wo I think World Bank funded it, but these are also very expensive, by the way. This is like $500 million each.
Right.
So, these are the more flashy projects. I don't know if the circular railway will ever take off. I don't know if that will ever happen. In Lahore, there's supposed to be 2 more corridors. I know LDA us pe waqtan fawaqtan kuch kaam karta rehta hai, depending on who's in charge in the provincial government. I don't know if Peshawar is building anything more. They're adding more because Peshawar it's a trunk line in the center, and they're adding feeder service to it.
Yeah.
Rawalpindi, Islamabad, they've just added 2 more routes. I think there's a space for there's space for a lot more routes. So actually, Jo Punjab Transport Department or whatever, Jo Metro Bus Authority, they've done a lot of planning already for even like second-tier cities. I think over the next 10, 15, 20 years, and we'll really see a lot of growth in this space. I think momentum ban gaya hai.
Yeah.
I hope the momentum continues.
Yeah.
And by the mid of the century, when the country hits 100, we actually might be at a place where our cities are qualitatively better than they used to be if this momentum continues.
Yeah, because good public transport really has the potential to cause that sort of revitalization. Matlab, you see it in all over New York, London type जो शहर हैं, जहाँ stop होता है train का या subway का या whatever, there's like tiny economies around those stops because there's so many people moving through it. And people move to live close to it, businesses move close to it. Like the city shapes itself around this, right? Once you build a network, unke nodes pe, like the major nodes, like offices will move close to. So a lot of your cities will regenerate. And they need to, like, purana infrastructure needs to be rehabilitated and so on. Public transport could be what drives this regeneration of your cities. And cities have done that successfully. और जब 250 का आपका पेट्रोल होगा 20 लाख की ऑल्टो होगी तो like I think 25
25 की हो गई है, 20
Oh
की तो
God.
भी नहीं है शायद, maybe I don't know, I haven't checked all
I
those
know
prices.
कि somebody said कि Civic 80 लाख की हो गई है, and I was like, बंद कर देंगे ना, we don't need them anymore. ठीक है, Gulraiz, do you want people to find you on Twitter to ask you questions about?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, okay. So I'll link your Twitter. Is that the best way? Do you have a secret Instagram?
Yeah. No. Twitter is fine. Twitter is good.
अच्छा चलो ठीक है. Well, we'll link your Twitter and the articles and Mahim's article, shout out,
Yes.
in the description ताकि आप भी पढ़ें and get inspired.
Absolutely.
Anything else you want to talk about? Unrelated question, but has to be asked at the end of every episode. Do you have a jinn story? Heard, personal, experienced, any?
I yes, but I've also always rationalized them as either this was just like, a figment of my imagination. Like several times, like when we were younger, what seemed like spirits around in the house or whatever, but I don't take that very seriously.
Do you have like a particular one that stands out where you're like, I'm rationalizing it, but only rationalize?
I think it was so when we were really young and we were all sleeping in the same room, and then my mother used to sort of sometimes have these episodes, which I think were psychological or neurological, but she would have a different voice and her eyes would glaze over and stuff like that. And, it would happen several times and it was scary, but and then it stopped eventually. And it maybe stopped because she was not stressed out anymore or whatever. Like that's how, but in those moments, there would be a different voice. And the actions would be very different, and I definitely think that was scary. And
this was you mentioned in your Karachi write-up that you lived in PCHS, right?
We now live in PCHS.
You now live in PCHS. अच्छा. Yeah. क्योंकि हमारी भी ननिहाल में ना हमारा घर नानी का अम्मी वगैरह का was in PCHS, which is obviously one of the sort of old mohallas of Karachi, and proper jinn activity.
Hardly a mohalla.
yeah, sure. But like, there was significant anecdotal jinn activity. तो मैंने कहा यार अच्छा shit. So maybe it was. But no, I'm glad your mother's better. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap?
No, I think all good. Like I don't like the sound of my voice that much.
Was this episode within expectations?
I'm glad we finished in the hour.
ठीक है. But unfortunately, now that you've done one, there's a possibility for more. So fair warning, कुछ और हो गया तो we'll have you on as our unofficial expert. We'll just ठीक है. All right. Thank you very much for watching. That's the end of the episode. We'll stop recording now. Any questions, send them to Gulraiz, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.